These limes are actually from my lime tree. I feel like it's very luxury to have homegrown limes in homegrown, well, SodaStream, homegrown soda water. I want to talk to you right now about burnout because I didn't realize I was burnt out until I wasn't burnt out anymore. And so I'm going to talk to you about the signs that I didn't realize were burnout at the time, and essentially what happened over the last few months for me to get to this point. And when I say I didn't realize I was burnt out until I wasn't, is essentially I feel completely different. Like I feel a lot of my energy come back, which I'll explain a bit more in a moment, but I just really didn't realize that a lot of the things I was experiencing over the last, like all of 2025, so almost, over a year, was very much related to burnout. So I haven't created any notes for this one, so let's hope I can stick to a structure enough. But why don't we start at the start? So I used to do fly in, fly out work, which I can tell you now since I've left. I was working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I know it sounds like a dream roster, but you need to remember that the 2 weeks on are grueling, right? 12-hour days, you're eating, yes, you're not cooking and cleaning, but you're eating food that is not healthy. It is covered in, even the salad, which is usually moldy, is covered in canola oil. So, you'd have canola oil seeping out of, I would have canola oil seeping out of my skin. I know, gross, but it would just be covered in everything. So you'd be eating basically a canola oil based diet. You'd either be outside in the heat or the cold, which is actually nicer than sitting in the office the whole time. You'd be sleeping on what felt like prison beds. There'd be sounds, early mornings, 4 a.m. mornings. You go to bed as early as possible, the best you can do. So that's just like, and that's why, fly in, fly out workers get paid so much, right? So you're out in those areas and you get paid for being out in those areas. So, I'm not saying that, of course, everything could be better, but the point is that I chose to do that job knowing that that was what the sacrifice, I suppose, would be, which is fine, but it was just wearing down on me physically much more than I realized. Then a lot happened at work, which I have mentioned here and there in pieces of content, which I won't go into a lot of detail because I'm not sure if that's really... A lot happened that created a lot of mental and emotional stress for me, is what I can tell you. And that mental and emotional stress did affect me at work. So it was very obvious that I was burnt out while I was at work. But why it's important why the detail that I was fly in, fly out is important is I knew I was burnt out at work, but then I would go home and I would feel fine. I'd feel great. And this is maybe if you're obviously not working fly in, fly out, maybe on the weekends, maybe if you're not at work, you have energy. You're like, oh, I can actually do things. I can, socialize. I can think. I can be creative. I can sleep. It's all these things. So it's like, okay, maybe I'm not burnt out. Maybe there's nothing wrong. Maybe it's literally my job. And so it wasn't until that I left that job that I couldn't blame the job. I was burnt out because of work, but remaining burnt out, I couldn't blame because of work. Let me try and explain that again. When I would come home from work and I didn't feel great, it would be like, oh, I'm just tired from work. Yeah? When I wasn't coming home from work because I never went to work, when I was tired, I couldn't say it was because of work. I really had to look a lot deeper. I really had to reflect a lot deeper. And for about the last 5 years of my career, I have been working pretty damn hard, I'll be honest. I think the last time I had a really long break was when I was in my early 20s, when I went over to Europe for 10 months. That was such a good trip. It was so much fun. But that was honestly the last time where I had a really extended break. And the thing is with me is like when I work so hard. I go 100%, pretty much 100% of the time. And so when I got to the point of leaving my last job and then living my life without having to go to that job, any of that fatigue or the moodiness or I would get like weird anxiety. So some of the less obvious signs would be, or the more obvious signs are going to be, tiredness, difficulty sleeping, irritability, anxiety over things that you really probably don't need to have anxiety over. Anything that feels like it's affecting, for me, at a physical and safety level. So what I mean by that is if I would get anxious if I couldn't have a nice morning routine, or if I couldn't work out. It was like I was really attached to having the right morning routine so that I could feel calm, that I could have energy throughout the day. It almost felt like my mind, my creativity, energy required a very clear structure. And the difference now is that it can be quite fluid, and I still like having a really good routine, but I don't get anxious if I'm having a late night, or if I don't get to work out, or, if I just have fun or go away for the weekend. The other thing that I noticed the big difference that's a bit quite subtle is, for a long time, and for someone that's quite creative, there's going to be the creative things you really enjoy that are kind of like an outlet. And then there's the creative tasks or even administrative tasks that are not so fun, not such an outlet. And what I noticed is I had difficulty doing the hard stuff. Like when I was burnt out, it was really hard to do the hard stuff, and I was always focusing on doing the things that were fun and enjoyable, which is what we want to do, right? But the problem is, if you're always focusing on the fun and enjoyable, it's really hard to then complete anything, like finish a project or finish a set of tasks, which then adds to the mental strain, and you're having like I had all these tabs open, and then I was getting more anxious about having all the tabs open as opposed to just finishing. And so what I've noticed now, the shift of recovering from this burnout, I suppose, I don't know what else to call it. At the time, I was like, I'm not burnt out. Like, that's because you hear stories, right, of people burnt out that are, passing out at work or having to go to like the doctors or having a medical issue. And the thing is, like, these are very extreme cases, and you don't want to wait till it becomes a very extreme case. And yes, you're probably all thinking that it's like, okay, well, you quit your job, that's nice. Like, what about me? What about I actually have to work, so what do I have to do? I'm going to get to that. And I know that it took me leaving work, but the reason I'm actually talking about this is not to try and convince you to leave your job, but because sometimes noticing that, behaviors or mindset are actually not you naturally. They are a byproduct of an excess of stress in your current life, I hope is empowering, because then you can see that, if any of these symptoms that I'm talking about you have, that it is actually solvable. You can actually it's not just who you are, is what I'm trying to say. These are behaviors that are a result of, excess stress. And so you will naturally adjust to your natural behaviors when you resolve, overcome, remove those stresses. And so back to the creative part is, I found myself always seeking the fun, creative tasks and not wanting to do the hard stuff, because I guess a part of me was still, how do I say this? It wasn't that I was like anti-hard. That sounds so wrong. It was like for so long I'd been doing so much work, because I mean, that's the other thing with fly in, fly out. The reality is, and anyone that works in the resource industry, mining, oil and gas, any of these, is it's actually it's either repetitive or boring, or you can be waiting around quite a lot. Like my job, actually, no one wanted to admit it, but I was waiting for things to happen, and I would be the person that then solve the problems when they happen, but I actually had to wait for the problems to happen. So for me, what is it? There's burnt out and then there's bored out. Bored out? Yeah. It's like you get so bored, you get burnt out. And so I had the physical strain of being at that job, like the long hours, etc., being away from home, plus the mental strain of being so bored it was stressful, and then the emotional strain of various changes that happened. And so when I finally left, it was like I think I was just craving the fun, right? It's like literally like a holiday, right? Like you've been at work for so long doing things you just like, just like draining, getting through it, and then to then go on a vacation and do whatever you want and have fun and always seek out those things. So in hindsight, I realized that maybe I shouldn't have. Like I literally finished my employment and went straight into entrepreneurship. And, I don't regret that, right? Because I've already come so far in the last, 6 months it's been. That's wild. Almost 7 months now. I've come so far in those 7 months, but sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have just like eased up a little bit. Maybe I should have just gone a bit slower and actually just had fun, because what I was really noticing, and I guess like this again, why I'm saying this, so because we don't all have that 6 months to just have fun. But what I was noticing is, I would get quite scattered and I couldn't stick with something for long enough to complete it without then feeling drained again. And now it's gone to the point where I can complete things really easily. Like it's almost like, I'm like, why was it so hard? Why did I find it so hard? It is actually so much easier. And so my ability to just like stick with things, to be strategic, to be consistent is so much easier now that I've recovered from that bored out from spending so much time doing things draining that I had to then do things a whole lot fun. And now I can balance out the, not so fun or like the have to do's with the things that I do enjoy doing. Another very important, I'm trying to think of another word that's not symptom, but difference I've noticed between when I was burnt out and now when I'm not is socializing. When I was burnt out, doing anything social, doing anything outside of my routine was exhausting, like so exhausting. Like even if you're an introvert, it was like, I'm like, I just want to stay home and hide away and not want to speak to anyone. It was just like, it was too much. It was like, it was just too much when it wasn't even that much. And now it's like, I'm craving to hang out with people, to connect and, host live events and go to other events and be a part of a community, where before I was just like, I have no energy for anyone, which really surprised me because I'm an extroverted introvert, meaning that I like the technical things around introvert. Like, I get energy from being on my own, all that kind of stuff, but I do actually love talking and socializing and interacting and learning from people and having that connection. But while I was burnt out, it was just like, I was like, oh my God, am I going to be like this? Like, how long am I going to be like this? Am I just going to be a hermit now? Is this my life? But it was really like, I was just like in emotional recovery mode at a level I hadn't even considered. And so the three main differences between when I was burnt out and now when I feel fresh, whatever the opposite of burnt out is, I feel like energized. Yeah, like just good. Like, I can say I'm great and I actually feel great. So three main differences are, when I was burnt out, I was anxiously protective of my health and wellness routine. I would feel destabilized if I couldn't stick to my routine. 2, I thought I was being creatively productive, but I was also very creatively scattered, just like kind of all over the place, couldn't fully commit to a direction. And 3, I was mostly antisocial because I live with my partner and have a dog. It was like I could make do with that amount of social interaction and calling friends every now and then, but now that I'm actually wanting to go out and about and interact with people face to face, it was quite a difference with how antisocial I actually was then to now, where I can have a flexible routine. I can totally miss things and still feel great. I am so clear on what I need to commit to and what I need to focus on, and actually being strategic about that in a business-minded way. And I'm excited to get out and about. The journey from that point to now, yes, of course, it took me leaving. It's not just that job, right? Like, it was an accumulation of years of being a perfectionist, I think. Yeah, I don't think I've ever said that out loud, but at any job I was at, I would be stressed about doing the best job ever, even if I didn't actually really care about that job. So for years, it's not that I was working harder than anyone else. It was that the whole time I would be mentally so intensely focused on doing a good job that even when I was bored, I was trying to do a good job, but I had nothing to do. So it was like my mind was imploding. And for years, having that like intense focus, and when I'm not doing, I'm stressed, and when I am doing, I'm stressed. And to now focusing on my own stuff and realizing that like I don't actually have to be, it's interesting changing to being your own boss, to having a manager, because it was always like I could always blame the fact that I had a manager, I had to do better to keep my job, or for someone else, or it was like this whole thing around having to prove myself and having to do the work better, and always making sure my reputation, I had a reputation and a work ethic to uphold. And so there was this kind of like layer of stress that I applied to myself, which often happens for, it's for everyone, but I was a young female in a male dominated industry, right? And there's, how do I say this politically correct, but it's common, right? To feel that pressure to prove. So now, to then being my own boss, I can't blame my manager because I am my manager. And so when I have these moments of like needing to be more perfect, needing to prove, it's like, hang on, I can let myself off the hook here. And these days you might say, well, yeah, it needs to be even better for the clients, for the content. It's like, yes, there is a section of work that I hold to the highest standard, which is, of course, my client work, my one-to-one client work, the products and programs I sell. But I don't need to apply that same level of high quality intensity to content, right? Because the thing is, like, I was applying it to almost like the wrong thing, really. Like, I was focusing too much on making a YouTube video perfectly, making it perfect, right? And it really just does not need to be. It can just be so much easier. And then I can have that energy to really focus on the quality of the client work, as opposed to focusing all my energy on making a YouTube video and then being exhausted by the time I get to the client work. And so being able to have that awareness of, okay, now I don't have anyone else to blame. So now I have to, and not push myself to be so perfect, to be trying to prove. And that really helped me, I guess, recover from that mental and emotional burnout, because I wasn't pushing myself to do better the whole time, and which started to create a lot of space and a lot of freedom to just do things well, but also to make it easy. For example, this YouTube video, I could have for a week sat down, taking notes, figuring out a better structure, figuring out the best points, the best stories to tell. But for this, I was like, you know what? Stuff it. I'm just going to sit down, record, see what comes up, and go with it. Which is also why I love YouTube, right? Because I just love it for that reason. I love watching videos like this, and I hope you do too. And so if you do know you're burnt out, or you're starting to think maybe I am burnt out, or you're really just like, oh my God, I'm so drained by my job, and you can't actually quit, or you're not in a position to quit, or you don't even know what you would do if you quit, there are the things you can kind of consider is, of course, the kind of the boredom piece. So burnout doesn't necessarily come from doing so much, but doing the things that drain us. So that is key. Notice what work is draining you, because the more you do energizing work, the less you're going to be drained. And it's that feeling of being drained that burns you out. That's why it's when you can be so bored and feel like you're not doing much, you can also get burnt out, because that actually, it's not doing nothing. Like, boredom at work isn't nothing. It is still a mental and emotional strain, because you're meant to be doing something, but you're not doing anything, which drains you. Or you're just doing something that bores you so much that it's just like, oh, got to get through it. And that constant pushing and pushing and pushing becomes quite exhausting. This is why the whole feminine energy movement, if you will, has become so popular, because the feminine energy is the opposite of the pushing. It is the receiving, it is the allowing, which is quite nourishing and energizing for everyone, really, particularly because we've been in an era of like push, push, go. Like, even if you think about the industrial era, everything about it is like, you know, control, contract, push, mold, make, which is the opposite of feminine energy. And so bringing the elements of feminine energy, which is allowing and receiving and creativity and feeling and embodiment into work, is so nourishing when you do feel burnt out, when you do feel drained. Figuring out what your strengths are. This is a big one. I should probably do a whole YouTube video on it, but whenever you're working on your strengths, you're going to find it energizing. And why I mentioned that is because that is quite strategic when it comes to career or work or business. Is if you're in a position where you can't just do less work, then at least doing work that relates to your strength is going to help with that energizing element. The other thing is the proving perfectionism part. This is big. Notice where you feel like you need to prove. Notice where you feel like you just need to make it a little bit better when it's already pretty good. And ask yourself, how can you make it easier? How can it be easier for you to do more? Which I know is kind of the opposite of what we're talking about. But when you think about it's not necessarily about doing more, but when you think about how can you make it easier so you can do more, it kind of forces you to think about what you're doing in a like system efficiency type of way, because it's not just the one task, it's you're making it easier for yourself for all your tasks, or for, that task times 10, 100, however many times you do it. And so how do you make it easier is sometimes you just get certain steps done faster. You don't overthink certain steps, you kind of systemize it. And that's going to take off a lot of mental strain and the feeling like you're always behind, or you're not quite good enough, or you always got to do more. And you're probably all going to think that I was going to tell you to do more breath work, sleep better, eat better. These things are of course important, but if you are aware enough about the symptoms, if you will, that I've spoken about, then you're probably someone that's already pretty healthy and has a pretty good routine. So I'm not going to mention that because you're already there, and that's probably not the thing that is lacking in your life. It's not the lack of course, the lack of sleep and the lack of a healthy routine is going to contribute to burnout. But if you're watching this video, I highly doubt that is the reason that is contributing to your burnout. If anything, trying to do so much and trying to do more could be adding to that mental strain, because the most ironic thing of all is in the modern day, more people get mentally burnt out than they do physically burnt out. And so you've got, to summarize, focusing on the tasks that energize you as opposed to draining you, kind of dialing back on the needing to prove and the perfectionism. And the third thing I'll say about recovering from burnout is to actually mix things up when it comes to your routine. Sometimes having that variability can just create enough of a shift, because that variability can bring in new ideas and new inspiration and new energy that might feel missing. Like sometimes, as I've mentioned, feeling burnt out is very similar to just a stagnation, a mundane, a kind of melancholy in your life and environment. And so sometimes changing, not adding more, but changing things up, like as opposed to, like for me, for example, this week, as opposed to weightlifting every week, I did some yin yoga, and it was so nice and yes, I do yin yoga at home, but it was so nice to be in the classroom, in the space, doing it actually for a whole hour, going slow, being guided. And, it's not like it was fun and exciting. It was just a shift. It was something different. It broke me out of this kind of repetition that I'd been getting myself into, even though I work for myself now. So that's it for this video. I think my partner and puppy are just about home, but thanks for watching.